Hi there, and welcome to this Mad Sense video in which I want to talk about the mind and the brain together as a predictive system. So I've often said, when sort of talking to people about the hearing voices experience, I've often said that I was kind of lucky in the sense that that my experience of voices came late in life. So I had sort of a late onset. And the reason I say is, that I was lucky was that I felt that, I was already confident in who I was. I knew who I was comfortable with who I am. I rather like me. But of course, all of that actually came from knowing how to deliberately use my mind to create the kind of experiences that I want. So of course, what happened, when I started to hear voices was that actually I just, in the end saw these, as a whole bunch of new stimuli that didn't come from my environment. They provoked all these questions, which were the experience of it. And of course, what that led to for me was kind of saying that actually all these unusual stimuli, for me, it's these stimuli that are extreme. That's what led to the extreme states. And by extreme states, I meant, another way to look at it from a mind process point of view is that actually you're kind of hitting all your thresholds and limits. So one of the things that I've got out of this is, having worked from my understanding of the mind from my practice of neuro-linguistic programming, which is literally about how language programs the mind. Of course, what voices say is language. And of course, I understand, how the voices, are interfering, if you like, at the neuroplastic level. What this has done is, in a strange way, has informed, if you like, my understanding of the mind, or advanced my understanding of the mind. And that's actually what I want to talk about here. I actually say that actually, madness is a struggle to deal with unusual stimuli. And in fact, I talk about the sort of natural mind rather than the normal mind. So I actually just call it nat mind because I think it's actually based on the mind works based on our evolution as social mammals. So the mind is a predictive system, and of course, it's supported by brain processes. We live in a world where our senses take in a huge amount of data all the time in this constant stream, this sort of flow of stimuli. And the brain literally automatically selects, what is relevant for us most of the time. And we dismiss the rest, and that is our sort of fast thinking process. And most of our thinking is in fast mode. For that very reason, what we're doing is we're basically creating capacity in the mind, in the aware mind, to enjoy life. So what we're doing, as I say, is we're actually, the brain is actually finding all the patterns in our stimuli and using those patterns and differences to those patterns to select the stuff, that's actually relevant to us, and we dismiss the rest. Of course, the stuff that we dismiss is actually there, typically in some way. And what we have to do if we want to find it is we can actually interrogate it. And to do that, what we do is we slow it down. The most obvious example of kind of slowing down is when we actually go into sort of problem solving mode, because then what we do is, we then very deliberately look at the outcome we want and the evidence that we have. And we kind of then say, well, do we have all the evidence? Do we have all the right information? Have we selected all the information from what's available? So that's actually just, again, it's another sort of natural process. That's our sort of slow thinking. So we have this fast thinking and slow thinking, to use sort of Michael Kahneman's language. And so, so what I learned, if you like, from neurolinguistic programming, is a few things. In fact, I only, although I apply it sort of naturally and intuitively, there are only a few key principles that actually sort of give you 80% of the benefit. And those are the things I've learned to apply all the time. They become habitual. And I think this is the whole point. And I think the thing is that, is that we need to understand that actually language programs the mind. So the language we choose to use actually makes a difference. And that what you can do is change your whole perception of the world, of life, by slowing our programs down. So the stuff we've automated, to create new ones that work better for us. That's really all that NLP teaches you when you're applying it to yourself. And the basics are really, really simple. You can interrupt a program, so you can identify it. You can identify a point in it. You can interrupt it, and you can, if it's not achieving what you wanted to achieve, you can replace it with something that does, and you do that by simply working from the outcome end of the equation. You ask yourself, what would I like to happen here? What is it I'm trying to achieve? What would I like to see happen? And you literally can ask yourself those questions. And as you ask yourself those questions, of course, you start to find the answers from the data that's in your brain. So interrupt and replace is the one idea. The second one is to actually work from the outcome end of the equation. And the third one is just really a simple kind of idea from, you might experience it as customer service, for example. But if you think about the outcome you want and you describe it at a good enough level of detail, then when you get that outcome, you'll know that you have it. And so what you've done there is you've found an outcome that satisfies your expectation. So you've got a perception of what's happened that is as good as, or well, you could at least compare it to your expectations. And that comparison is really the whole basis of customer service and creating sort of customer experiences. So if you're getting something that's better than you expected, you're more satisfied. And you can actually learn to do this deliberately. And what that actually is about is simply a model for actually creating good experiences in the mind. If I can work with my mind to put myself into situations where the experiences that I have are actually better than one might sort of ordinarily kind of expect, or at least as good as I expect, then actually the energy that results from that, literally the emotions that flow from that, are actually good emotions. And of course, that's literally is just about creating happiness. So that's kind of the gist, if you like, of this kind of of this video. What I'm doing here is sort of talking about the theories that I have sort of integrated to describe sort of natural mind. And by the way, all the other videos on this channel so far are designed to be free for people who hear voices. This one is a bit more sort of the intellectual property that I've developed. This is what I'm hoping will make a living for me in working with researchers and professionals. So please just respect that this particular information actually has sort of copyright. And what you will have actually seen from the videos so far in the sort of first 5 chapters of this channel is that there's a very, very clear relationship between information and emotion. And I just describe the two of those together as infomotion. And I'm kind of saying, what I've done is I've integrated some existing theories, added to them, and I simply describe, the sort of flow of information as something that produces our energy. And if we actually understand that, we will be able to build our what I call psyche vigilance. So we can actually maintain a happy psyche. It's what the industry probably currently calls psychoneuroimmunology. But I say it's simply being aware of your mind. You can actually create good experiences in the mind. Then what I want to do is kind of show you that actually the flow of information and emotion through the mind, the piece that we're aware of, is of course supported by the brain. And I'll kind of describe this in sort of 2 pieces, if you like. The one is the kind of gates, which is the sort of information gates. So step by step, we want good quality information. And if we can improve the quality of that information, we will prove the experiences that we are able to achieve. And of course, experience kind of happiness. And our gears, if you like, are the factors in the brain that actually change our pace of thinking and our direction of thinking, if you like. Then that's kind of comes more sort of from the emotional side. So if the flow of information reaches a gate and the gate says not good enough, based on the information, then what of course that does is it redirects the processing in some new direction, slows it down and says, try this way, try that way. And that's what I mean sort of by gears. So that's the information side. The gears are kind of the emotion side. Now, of course, this is brain-based stuff. So we kind of think actually we can't, some of us might think that we can't actually influence that. And actually that's not true. There is plenty that we can act on. And in fact, we can act on information. We can actually act on our emotions in several different ways. And we can, of course, interpret those two together, the flow, so the outcome of the flow in our story in different ways. And what I want to do is to say that actually there's sort of 20% of the stuff here that gives you 80% of the benefit. And really, from an information point of view, you can use, as I say, a few techniques from neurolinguistic programming to help improve your objectivity. And I use that word deliberately here because a lot of our experiences are subjective. Of course, that's the fun of them. But actually, if you're designing new experiences, what you want to do is be objective about it and get the sort of quality into the gates and the gears. And if you do that, then of course you're creating future experiences, of course, that are fun. And really, what this is about is literally about getting the right relationship between objects in the mind, where an object is just a collection of information that literally, or the information that identifies the characteristics, of an object in the mind. And of course, the flow of information is literally about changing the relationships between the different objects in our life. So NLP helps us introduce some objectivity in very simple ways. We can simplify our understanding of our emotions. I'll show you why they're so complex, first of all. And then say, actually, you can simplify our understanding of our emotions, especially when you're just trying to design, outcomes that will satisfy your emotions. And we can do that by looking at our 3 emotional systems. And I say +1 here because it's our feelings are usually a combination of what each of our 3 systems brings to the party plus the summary view. So it's typically 3 systems +1, and that's the sum of our emotions. And this is actually why we find, when people ask us sort of how we feel about something, it's why we kind of hesitate. We're a bit slow to actually answer that question, is because it's a composite thing. And of course, the emotion we're feeling is just a summary feeling made up of a number of components. And I'm simply saying we can actually simplify by looking at the components identified by our systems. And then, of course, we can simplify our story based on the sort of 5 themes that I talk about, as you've seen in the My Story model. Me, my people, my day, my future, our future. And really, if you think of those 5 themes and can keep them in mind, you can actually direct the flow towards those. And then I'll just summarize by pointing out that actually, sort of what I'm calling happiness quality assurance, because that's what this is about, is actually using the mind to create quality experiences, which of course, leads to happiness, is actually a pretty simple thing. There are a handful of techniques that I say give you 20% of the effort gives you 80% of the benefit. Fortunately, it's one of the things that works that works that way. So I've got 3 slides here on these things. I'm going to talk about the theories. Then I'm going to introduce the brain and say how does that affect it, and then I'm just going to use the same one to indicate the things that we can actually act on. Slides are a little complicated. But I think sort of simplifying the mind was perhaps taking me a little longer than I expected. So first of all, so information is for me, it's this flow of energy, our ebb and flow of energy. Our sort of energy levels sort of fluctuate during the day. It's not just based on what we take in. It's also based on how we view the world. The opportunities that are in front of us, or the duties that are in front of us, if you like. And of course, the opportunities, are the things that will increase our energy, and the duties are the things that will make us feel a little. And in fact, there's a very good indicator in there, is that if I sense or see something that I need to do as a duty, then my energetic response to it will be one thing. If I see the same thing as an opportunity, then of course my energetic response to it is something else. And this is the point I can actually change the energy in myself by changing the information that I attach to this particular object. As I say, whether I call it duty or opportunity actually makes a difference. And this, so in the same way that when I first went to the doctor and he described, the voices that I could hear as auditory hallucinations, that was a much, much better piece of information or a frame of reference to attach all this experience to than it would have been had he described, had he said to me, I have schizophrenia, because the implications that I would have projected from each of those 2 different descriptions would clearly have been very, very different. And when we understand this, we can actually use it to our advantage. And we can use it to our advantage to create flow. And flow really is based on our 3 emotional systems. It's actually confidence. So my monitoring system is confident in me and in the world around me. My drive system is looking for balance. So this is where I act to mediate my way through the world in relationship to others. Of course, this is the stuff we're not, we're not islands, but where every action I take, of course, affects others. And if I take good actions or right actions, of course, what that will do is create harmony, not just for me, of course, but for those that sort of I'm around us. And this is simply what I mean is that actually, if we describe these things, of course, in terms of the three emotional systems, so this is monitoring system, drive system, soothe system, then the sum of those is actually flow. So that's what I mean, of course, by understanding these things in terms of 3 + 1. It's a good way to kind of help us just understand and make sure that we've covered, if you like, the basis on all of our systems. So we might talk about flow, but this is what it's made up of, if you like, in that kind of context. So you've seen, of course, that I describe our information flow in terms of these five steps that we receive stimuli in a context which is usually chosen, which we usually choose on the basis of the habitat that we're in. We choose it based on habitat, not the specific source of this, of the stimulus that produces a reaction as new information blends with old. As I work with the information, my response is this exchange of new bits of information where I'm comparing two states, my expectation with the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. And that gap, if you like, between expectation and outcome is my satisfaction. And if you can't get no satisfaction, to use the Rolling Stones, what you of course can do is work with this process to make sure that you get satisfaction, and you can make that a habit. And of course, that's really what happiness QA is all about. So really, this is just a combination of two theories, if you like, in the way that I talk about it. The one is, the brain-based piece, which is actually Bayes' theorem of perception. And that actually just derives from the fact of how we've evolved as social mammals, that the stream of stimuli that we receive, we pick them up sequentially. That's how we literally take them in, because we live on a planet that rotates every 24 hours. So our stimuli come in this kind of cycle. One follows another, and that's of course which gives us kind of this logical if then, or if this then that sort of predictive mind, which is what I'm representing by this kind of flow. And although I say we can actually sort of work from the outcome end and say, okay, if this is what I'm trying to achieve, then what do I need to do over here to make that happen? It actually, you hear the language I'm using, it's still if this is what I want to achieve, then that is what I need to do. It's actually the same process in this direction. It's just that, I'm now kind of saying, okay, this is my desired outcome. This is what I want to make my expectation, so that when I get there, the stimuli that I receive produce a good reaction, and then move me on to better outcomes. So you can think of this as as really, flowing in that direction. So even when we're actually working with it from this end, it actually is the same thing, just repeating. So this is the short cycle of thinking that just kind of repeats, if you like. And of course, that is supported by the brain, where each of these steps is marked by what I would call a gate. That actually, if we've got good information moving from one to the next, of course, that then is how we improve the quality. And of course, if we improve the quality of the flow, we will improve our reaction to it, and of course our satisfaction, of course, which is this outcome expectation measure over at this end. And of course the mind piece, which is us taking control of the process, where we can actually act on the process, it comes from the theories of neuro-linguistic programming. And I say it's really about using language to frame things differently, and to think about things differently. And typically, as I say, slowing it down by interrupting the process and then replacing it deliberately, mindfully, positively, to create good energy. So this process, of course, is regulated by our emotional systems. I've spoken about the three here, where I'm actually paraphrasing language from Paul Gilbert, who wrote the book sort of Mindful Compassion. There's another one that's just written in a slightly different context by Alan Watkins called Complete Coherence. And of course, that one was interesting to me because it comes from the business world. So Alan Watkins does leadership coaching based on neuroscience, basically. He draws this as a 4-box matrix. It's the same kind of thing, where the flight and fight sides are actually just two, sort of two of the boxes, and then there's 2 others up here. So you can actually correlate the 2. I just find this one a little simpler to use, and you'll see why in of course just a minute. So of course, typically what's happening, this now is body-based stuff, brain-based stuff. So we actually think we can't really influence it, but as I pointed out earlier on, with the kind of duty opportunity comment in the beginning, we can actually influence our emotional systems with the information that we use. And of course, the way that I do it in the models for mind strategies is I actually set principles that actually will that satisfy our soothe systems, and the principles I choose are based on our evolution as social mammals, so that our informations are true, or as true as we can actually get them. So of course, what happens is we interpret this in terms of our story, and you've seen the kind of my story model beforehand, where all I'm doing is connecting body and activity, mind and story, how we interpret it. And really where this comes from is a sort of combination of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So actually these 5 themes here are a variation on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which of course came from my working in the business world, implementing large projects, change management, aligning culture to strategy, building high performance culture. So that's the kind of context of where I've sort of learned about behavior. And of course, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is used quite a bit in that sort of context, because you're trying to align the needs of individuals to what the business is actually trying to achieve. Of course, what that tells you is that there actually are patterns to our behavior, which come from our evolution as social mammals. And of course, that's all this is representing. And then of course the second piece is that actually, of course, I've looked at behavior from the point of view of creating high performance behavior. That actually, the way you think about this is that actually the result that you're achieving is greater than the sum of the parts, both for the individual, of course, and for the organization. And that actually is a reflection of the same kind of thing, of this sort of flow kind of idea is, and I'll show you in just a second, is it how achieving one thing builds to achieving another thing, builds to achieving another thing. And so of course that's how the sum is greater than sum is greater than the part. And of course the interesting thing, of course, about organizational behavior is that if you work in that field, there are many models of behavior, from behavior in organizations to leadership styles, leadership brand. So you can model leadership coaching, you can model talent development, you can model, say, customer service experiences. You can model people experiences. So the whole idea of modeling behavior is actually something that's not at all new in the business world, of course. And of course, all I did in terms of combining these things was I went back to the first principles of evolution and kind of saying, well, actually, how does the mind actually work? The mind evolved in a particular context where we are going out into the world and doing particular kinds of things, not alone, but with other people. We are filling our day to create a better future for myself and for others. And it's as simple as that, if you to remember what these kind of 5 actual themes are. And if I was going to pick out sort of 2 things from the sort of list of evolutionary principles, I think the 2 that sort of matter the most are, one, that the mind is actually always on and it fills capacity. So even though I talk about us encountering the world in a particular way, and you might sort of think of this, sort of perhaps in in Africa sometime back, in sort of tribal communities where people spent a good portion of their day sort of foraging for food and caring for children or for the tribe. And that sort of full sort of most of the day. Whereas what we've managed to do, of course, is we've managed to make those components a sort of much, much smaller piece of a day, or we don't think of it that way anymore. We might be doing, might be going to work every day, but of course, which is bringing in the, the money at the end of the month. So we expect to sort of enjoy that, which is a good thing. But really, all that's shifted is the proportion, if you like, of stimuli that are coming from our environment and from the mind. So really, what we could just recognize here is that the mind is always on. So what it does is it fills capacity, and of course, it tries to optimize that capacity, which is what I'm talking about over here. And of course, what we want to do is spend the minimum amount of time on taking care of. We want to spend some time sort of conceiving, investing, in our future. And of course, what we want to do is spend the majority of our time actually, of course, enjoying life. I mean, just, well, pretty straightforward. So we need to recognize that actually that the mind fills capacity. So some of our stimuli come from ourselves. And of course, that's the piece that we can work with very deliberately to create sort of better futures. And of course, better futures are not things that we achieve in isolation. We achieve them with others. So, the other point is to recognize that we are social mammals. That's how we've evolved. That's what's producing all the right kinds of signals, in the brain. Is that actually, if we think, if we want to summarize what it means to us to be social mammals, the whole point is that I thrive when we thrive, because if we're thriving, then we're able to take care of each other. We can create better ideas together that link my future to our future. And that allows, of course, all of us, to spend more time actually enjoying what it is that we do. So the My Story model, as I say, is this connection, body, mind, world. That is, as I say, a development of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a number of organizational behavior models, which, as I say, I learned in the business world. And I guess, the thing that I'm using is what I would call a life coaching model, which is kind of partly based on the leadership models that I've actually been exposed to. And then, of course, I say some going back to the drawing board and saying, what is it that underpins this thing? And of course, it's that the brain is developed based on the way that we've actually evolved. And if the brain is actually driving the process, then of course that is what we need to understand. So then, just kind of summarizing the theories, even though I'm integrating them kind of differently, and I'm adding more on the next two slides. This flow is, I say, is a combination of Bayes' theorem of perception and neurolinguistic programming at the outcome end, Bayes' theorem of perception at the input end rather. The emotional systems that I'm talking about, derive from Paul Gilbert, Alan Watkins. There are others; those are good ones to read. And as I say, My Story is from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And of course, because it's needs-based, our interpretation is where we give it significance. And of course, the way that we actually integrate these things is based largely on what we do. So we might do, kind of a lot of thinking, but most of the thinking we do is in preparation for what we act on, for the things we act on, the things we speak about, is kind of sharing, to make sure it works for all of us. And then, of course, the things we act on are the things that translate, of course, to activity. And of course, that's actually how we integrate, what we think about translates to what we do. So actually just scheduling it in, what am I doing during my day, is our process of actually integrating, the inputs I'm getting from the world and from our mind. That's actually how we bring them together. And of course, if you like, the sort of evolutionary piece of this is that, as we sort of move through the world, we encounter new objects. This is us learning and discovering. So I think of it in that context, because this is what's programming the mind. We're being exposed to, kind of think of it, sort of, as we're growing up, for example, perhaps, we're being, we're encountering a whole bunch of new objects, of course, which stimulate our curiosity. So this is an object, of course, that we sort of populate with more information. And of course, what we do, of course, is ask the question is, what can I do with it to achieve the results that I'm looking for? And that actually is the simple basis of our programming. So if this, then that is the simple, object action result. And of course, as I do this many, many, many times, I create programs because some of the stuff repeats. I then ask myself the question, how can I transfer this to other similar situations? That's just our learning process, kind of saying, okay, in doing that, I discovered this, and therefore, knowing this, so if this, then what does this mean in a different context? So we're constantly, are taking stuff we've learned in one context and applying it to another, but it's the same basic step. So here's the new object. Okay, well, what does that mean? So if I act on it in this way, then this is the result that it will actually achieve. So this is us, taking the, this is our object, we populate it, that's our interpretation. Our action is us asking the question is, what will this mean if I project it into the world? So those are the results I can achieve. These are the ones I act on. This is the stuff that I do. This is just our, our sort of our integration of this. And of course, the stuff that's actually stimulating the mind here is that actually when we do this, we're getting feedback from the world that we're in. So we're getting feedback from the people that we're with, the people in my day, feedback, and I'm seeing this in myself in terms of what this means for me and sort of my story. And of course, my story is just one example of our story. So of course, I often see that in the context of other stories. So of course, as we are out there, are out there doing things, achieving the outcomes that we want, we're getting feedback from the people around us that stimulates our reward system, which is this combination of satisfaction, the difference between outcome and expectation, and of course the progression of it. So how does this help me, move forward in my life, projecting from where I am, to be doing, fun and interesting things with people to fill my day, build a future that actually hopefully builds our future as a social group. And of course, so there are the two sides of this that we want to think about. Sorry, before I get there, what this does. So this flow through the program, has some steps regulated by our emotional systems. So first of all, when I'm encountering this new object, I'm asking myself the first question is it safe? Because obviously, to thrive, I need to survive. So the first question I ask is the survival question. But of course, the other thing about how we've evolved is that actually, we're about thriving, not surviving. We've got to survive to thrive, but actually the majority of our day is about thriving. And that's about getting this balance right, where we're spending less time taking care of, more time conceiving and investing in our future, and of course, more time enjoying. That's the sort of thrive model. But in the program, the first question we're asking is our monitoring system is looking at the world I'm in, the context I'm in. So I'm over here somewhere doing this, and I'm getting a new stimulus. I'm asking the question, is it safe? And if no, the question is, do I run away? Do I fight it? If yes, I move up the equation and then kind of say, okay, this is safe, so what can I do with it? And what I do is I look at what I can do and what results that will actually achieve. So I'm now sitting here and looking at these two emotional systems and saying, okay, I can act on this, and these are the results that will actually achieve. So 3 is my my sense of agency, and 4 is actually the outcomes that I'm achieving, and this is of course where I'm getting the feedback that is stimulating my reward system. So that's the basics of the sort of programming. I'm going from, is it safe? Okay, am I secure in acting on it? But am I secure in acting on it? This is when I'm now projecting it outwards, and I'm saying, okay, if I do these things, that's the result I will achieve, and that of course, if I achieve that, it will stimulate my reward system, if you like, based on this. And of course, there is the information piece of this. So the flow of information is I've identified the object. Up here, I'm assessing the conditions of the world that I'm operating in. Then having a look at my sense of agency. What can I act on to influence the outcome? And so is this an opportunity that I actually want to grab hold of. So, from there, I'm creating a view of multiple opportunities, and I'm sort of, picking from those the ones I actually want to act on. And then, so this is the information point of view of this 1, 2, 3, 4 flow, and the emotion point of view, which I say is the gears. I'm asking the question, okay, is it safe? Is it secure? From here, I'm saying, am I in control, of the action and the opportunity? Can I act then on my preferences and achieve the kind of satisfaction that I'm looking for? So of course, these two, the dark gray, they go hand in hand. If our information is flowing well, I will gain this sense of good emotions and accelerate the process. And actually, in time, when we develop sort of patterns, we're able to reliably choose situations in which we achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. We almost bypass the drive system, if you like. We go, 1, 2, 4. And of course, that's fast thinking. In slow thinking, what we do is we kind of go here and say, okay, I need to modify this somewhat. And what are the things I can act on? Okay, so if I do this, then that. So even when we're modifying, we're actually just modifying a small piece at a time. And of course, the piece that we don't notice, of course, is this flow from object, action, result through these kind of 4 basic sort of steps. But of course, once you're aware of them, you can sort of notice them. And of course, the way to really fix them is to put the right information in at each of these steps. And build, say, your happiness sort of quality assurance process. So if you can actually get that to work well and regularly, predictably, reliably, then of course what happens is that's where you're acting, as say, from your confidence point. That's what gives you confidence in who you are and confidence that you can create the story that you want. So this is confidence in who I am because my programs work. Confidence in the world that I am because I'm actually getting good feedback from my reward system, both from a satisfaction point of view and from a progression point of view. And that, of course, is, if you like, the theory and the practice, if you like, of our happiness quality assurance system, if you like, that helps us build flow in our lives and achieve confidence, balance, harmony. Okay. And of course, we can get those to work regularly. Then, of course, what happens is we appreciate life, and we are appreciated by others, in the kind of life that we're living. So, in the context that we live in, and it's to say this bridge from me to the people that I actually encounter through my day. So I appreciate, and I am appreciated. So, of course, that's what life is about: is building good appreciation. Which is literally, an increase in the value of the kind of life that I'm living. So that's about, building a life of purpose, of meaning, of value, of fun. So those are the basic theories involved. So working with that, what I want to do here on this slide is to say that actually, of course, this is an integrated system. And of course, what's happening is that there are brain processes that support this. And I'm just going to introduce them very, very briefly here because really, what I want to do is to sort of make the point, because when you actually see that the brain processing has a structure that is developed from our evolution, and you can see this literally in the structure of the brain, so you can see it to say that from an evolution as social mammals, of course, that there is a structure in the brain. So all I'm looking to do here is to show you its predictive nature, which is based on our usual flow, which is how you've basically seen from the previous slide, and to point out that our built-in sort of customer service function, if you like, or customer satisfaction function is based on this idea that what we're doing is we're comparing these two states of expectation and outcome, and that actually the difference between those two sets of information is what produces the emotion that we feel. And that emotion, I say, is made up of these kinds of 4 layers. So it's how we feel through the steps. It sort of builds, and actually, when you start to integrate it, you can actually typically identify where it's going wrong, and of course just fix the point at which it's actually going wrong. And of course I'll teach you to do some of that in the actually tools. So if we actually work with our expectation and our outcome, we can do a lot to actually achieve sort of satisfaction in our life. And if we can kind of actually set and maintain and lubricate the sort of the gates and the gears, the limits and our thresholds really. So our emotions are kind of setting the limits. We're kind of interpreting our thresholds in the story here. Then of course we can actually say work with our outcome and expectation to create good experiences in the mind and in the life, in life. And of course, a lot of our expectations are actually set by the brain and by our actual programs. So of course, we've done this many, many times in a particular situation, and we actually don't even realize that we've set this program. We can't actually, we don't typically integrate our program, but our brain has recorded this cycle of, with this object or context, these are the things I can do to achieve these results. And these actually are our programs. And it's our programs that typically set our expectations. Unless we're doing it deliberately, our programs will do it automatically. And that's the piece that we simply miss. And of course, just to show you how this relates to the brain and to the different sort of pieces of the brain, sort of as we evolved, if you like. I'm doing this very crudely here, but just to make the point, is that actually, if you look at these 4 steps, they relate to our sort of body stem and our first, what I just simply call our first, second, and third brains. So this is the first is the reptilian brain, the second is the limbic brain, and the third brain is the sort of frontal cortex. And really what's happening here is the first brain is, asking the question, is it safe? And sorry, and of course let me do it here directly. Sorry. So this is my representation, of the body stem, the first brain, the second brain, and the third brain. Where, as I say, the body stem is about conditioning. So what we're doing is we're taking care of ourselves and actually conditioning the body. We're preparing ourselves, to go out and do what it is we do. So take the extreme. If you happen to be, an Olympic sprinter, of course, what you'll be doing is conditioning your body in a particular way, for particular events, every now and again that, shape your, that every now and that shape your future. So your day is about practice, to perform well in a particular event. It creates a sort of, a better future for you. So you're doing a lot of sort of conditioning, of your body, and of course taking care of yourself. And of course, what the first brain is doing is assessing a situation over here. Is this kind of, is it safe question? And it's saying, not safe is the fire. Safe, it's okay, is the kind of move ahead. I then ask the question, am I actually feeling secure over here? And of course, as I assess using my frontal cortex, what the opportunities out there actually are, I then, cast it out to the world and then bring it back into myself and internalize and say, okay, this is the stuff I'm going to act on. That's my sort of my confidence point. So one is, the brainstem is kind of saying, am I sort of conditioned and ready? Then step 2 is this kind of, is this, safe, not safe? So am I willing to move towards it? And then 3, I'm actually saying, so this is giving me a sense of security, first of all, I'm willing to move towards it. Then 3, I'm actually throwing it out there and asking, okay, what are the opportunities? Which are the ones that I actually can make a difference in? So this is where I'm actually making my choice. I'm saying, am I able to do something? Do I have access to the opportunity? Am I able to influence it? That's me sort of throwing it out into the world. And of course, then I bring it back to me as a sort of person and saying, do I love this? Do I love this option that I have? And am I actually going to work with it? And of course, this is the point that I'm actually acting from to achieve the results. And of course, this is me just kind of, if I get this right and it works well, this is when I'm operating in my sort of comfort zone up here. And typically my monitoring system isn't raising any exceptions. It's simply saying yes and yes. And I feel like I'm moving between these two systems. And that's how most of us actually experience life. So the brain is actually supporting this flow. And of course, your information is stored in the brain in kind of different ways. And of course, each of these will be storing different kinds of information or looking at information from a different perspective. So what I want to do is just introduce the idea here actually that we have information windows. In our mind, this is a very complicated diagram, but I'll elaborate on it in other videos. The point I want to actually make is that actually what's happening here is that, we have, say, these two views of the world, what I expect, what I hope to achieve, and this whole idea of what I'm able to do and what I can actually access. So as I'm sort of mediating, I'm looking at two sets of information and trying to bring them together and kind of say, okay, this is what's possible, this is what I can do, where do the two meet? So what's the realistic expectation for me is really what I'm trying to do. And of course, as we move up this 1, 2, 3, 4 cycle, what we're doing is, we're checking the body, if you like. So we're kind of saying, we're doing this, we're checking the body and we're checking the world out there. And these are my two columns. So this is body, this is world, if you like. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of saying, am I ready? And of course, the way we're doing this is by exception. This is why I'm indicating this with kind of lists and a little cross. The thing that we will notice is the exception. Otherwise, we'll kind of feel good. And we'll say, okay, I can actually move towards it. I will populate the identity of this object. This is how I'm just representing this object and me sort of populating it. And I'm populating it by casting it out into the world, casting out my view of it, my interpretation, my implications, what I'm internalizing. I'm updating the information for that object. And of course, if I'm looking to act on it, I'm kind of assessing the world out there and saying, are the conditions correct? Can I actually see a way to access the opportunity? And of course, and then I'm going to engage with people to achieve it. And then, of course, basically, the outlook that I get from this process is either one that is actually says, I see an opportunity that builds my story. And then what I do, of course, is I act on it and I show my hierarchy pointing outwards here to represent me moving along this axis. And of course, if the opportunity doesn't look ready for me, if it looks like it's more of a sort of I'm representing by a downward trend, of course, then my focus shifts down and inwards, and I look to myself again, and I sort of go back down this sort of path. So this is actually just me kind of assessing, if you like, myself. Literally, if you can imagine yourself, doing a body check, so literally, which all comes in through the spine, the whole central nervous system connects everything. So imagine yourself going from the tip of your spine all the way up, through your forehead and out, and sort of projecting it. That's kind of how you're imagining me to the world. That's how I represent it. Some people may do it in different ways. Some people do it sequentially. Sort of in time. It's just sort of one way to do it. Key point that I'm taking an awfully long time to say here is that actually there are brain processes that support this. It's based on how our brain has actually evolved, and the piece that actually we may not be seeing is that our brain is actually calling up information based on this sort of process, what it's expecting next. Remember, this is a predictive process. So the brain is actually prefetching information from our cells, our capabilities, and the world, and it's matching those two together. And this becomes very clear, as I say, when you're actually, hear voices, that this is the thing that voices are interfering with, is they're getting in the way of our windows on the world. And of course, the most obvious example is when we're actually down here, and I'm seeing the world as an unsafe place. And of course, then what my windows are doing, they're focusing me right down here and saying, actually, this is an exception. It's not safe. do something about it. And the information I'm seeing is the information that says make safe. So I'm not getting past, this kind of first brain, into the questions of, is this something I want to do? What are my options? I'm simply locked down here, between this fire and the thumbs up. And of course, what voices tend to be doing is sort of holding our feet to the fire, and if you like, freezing us in this kind of space, and keeping us, kind of stuck there. So literally, in this state of mind where we're down here, we're getting this sort of frontal lobotomy, based on the chemistry that this actually produces, and we actually don't even see this information. And the way that we actually fix that, by the way, is in the same way that we deal with, say, safety in the workplace. What we do is we make it safe. We think about it in a safe mode, and we kind of say, well, figure out this might happen, that might happen. And we slow it down, and we kind of, think about what the risks are, and we then, work to mitigate the risks. That's just the mind in problem solving mode, making safe. So instead of looking at sort of, out here at opportunities, we're facing this way, and we're saying, how do we remove the threat? And of course, we can do the same thing in the tools that we apply in our mind for those of us who hear voices, but also those of us who experience depression, anxiety, all of those things. So I don't want to talk too much about this, other than to say that the brain is supporting both our emotions and our sequence of information that it actually presents to us. And of course, what we can do, of course, that's happening very fast based on the programs that we've actually developed. And of course, what we can do is we can actually learn, of course, to interrupt that and to replace it with something more realistic. And actually, this is the other point that I want to make with this slide, is that actually the things that we can work with are, I say the brain state is produced, to say, by these two things: the way the brain presents information to the aware mind, which I say is regulated by our emotional systems. The two come together in the programs that we actually create. Whilst we're not going to change the brain, the physiology of the brain in terms of the emotions it produces from the information presented, or the way the emotions create a window on the world and bring up particular kinds of information to us, that's going to happen. What we can do is we can actually learn to work with those gates and limits and thresholds to change this, these kinds of relationships. We can take control, basically, of this process. And we can do that, by, thinking about it in our story, which is where we sort of change significance and meaning. And it's what I call forward thinking. So we can actually think about things in advance. And you'll see in the tools section under sort of chapter 7 that a lot of the preventative stuff I talk about is about thinking through our day in advance. And I'm happy to be building an app based on that idea that at the moment I'm calling sort of forward thinking. And we can actually do this by focusing on primarily two things: by creating the right kind of expectations of our outcomes, and by actually just asking ourselves the questions, but what are the risks? Because these are the things that influence our emotions the most. If I get what I expect, my emotions will be stable. If I understand the risks and realize that I've prepared for them, I reduce the size of the reaction I'm going to get to things going wrong. And by figuring out the expectations and what they look like, of course, I'll be much more satisfied with the outcomes that I achieve. And of course, the way that we can actually do that is to think about our information. And let's say what I'll teach you to do in some of the Mind Strategy videos is the basics of sort of neurolinguistic programming. And I want you to think about just two things actually here, is that we structure our information in hierarchies naturally. And this is partly because we encounter so much information. And the easiest way to group information is in hierarchies. So this is like this, or this is not like that. So we look for things that are similar, things that are not similar, because actually as we're transferring what we've learned from one thing to another, we go from this thing to something that's similar. That's the easiest to transfer. To transfer it to something over there that's much less similar, is where we're actually slowing things down. And it's still an opportunity, It's just an opportunity that requires more work. So our very logical step is to go from, from what's similar, and then move along to what is sort of less similar. So what we can do, to manage that sort of process of how we move along is we can actually think about how we sort of change the context. We can actually just use the same information and say, what does it look like in a different context? It's one way to change our picture completely, because what that does is it brings up a whole lot of different reference information. So that's us manipulating the window that we're actually using. And of course, then the other one we can do is we can actually chunk up and down. So we can move up and down levels of detail. And that's all I'm trying to represent by this picture, is that, we're organizing information in a sort of hierarchy. So think of it in layers of no more than 3. It's enough, to model it. And we can talk about, our dreams, our themes, our memes. So dreams are what we're trying to achieve. Themes are the things we need to do to, to make work well, to achieve those dreams. And then the memes of the sort of programs that I'm actually creating. And if you just take that same hierarchy and drop it down a level of sort of detail, we can then sort of talk about, okay, so this meme is operating in this context. This context has particular parameters, and those parameters are what set the data and information that I actually need. You can learn to do that very, very simply in NLP, and it literally is to say, if you remember these two things, sort of change the context. So you can ask sort of questions about, well, this is not interesting in this space, but where might it be interesting? That's how you would sort of just prompt your brain to come up with a different sort of context. And then this whole idea of sort of chunking up and down, you can do actually with questions based on the idea of what's similar and sort of what's not similar. So when you're encountered with a piece of information and you want to chunk up, you can actually say to yourself, well, what is this an example of? And of course, that helps you chunk up and categorize and put stuff in hierarchies. And once you're kind of doing that, you can kind of say, okay, this one fits over here. So now I want to draw down, and you say, well, okay, what does this actually mean for this context? And those are the sort of basic tools for moving across the context and then up and down your information hierarchy. And that's really all you're trying to do. And so this, of course, is much, much easier than trying to work with your emotions. And that's the point, is that actually this, although it might sound complex here, I make it very simple in the mind strategies. Of course, remember here I'm talking theory. So of course, I say what you want to do when you do this, when you do it well, if you can actually align your stimuli to what you expect, of course, what you do then is you get better reactions to it. And of course, if you can use the information that you're getting to achieve, of course, better outcomes, of course, then what you're doing is you're stimulating your reward system, and you're getting better satisfaction and better progression. So so that's the basics, of the theory, if you like. So the models, of course, that I'm integrating. Sorry to go back here. Are this lot over here, which is the sort of flow of information, how the brain, regulates, the information and the emotion together, and a way for us to put a framework around our interpretation. So collectively, these components model our whole integrated system of the mind. And of course, recognize that the mind is a system. And the interesting thing, of course, about a system is that you can influence one piece. And of course, it has changes everywhere else. That's what makes it seem complex. But actually, if you recognize that this is the piece, the way the relationship, the brain presents a relationship between information and emotion automatically, that actually shapes that's our brain-based state. But of course, what we can do is we can use the mind to interpret differently, and we can use the mind to actually think through the information differently, as a way to reach new interpretations. And of course, by doing that, by acting over here and over here, what we're doing is we're creating new programs. And of course, as we create new programs, the programs are the things that capture our happiness, quality, assurance, if you like. So what you can do is create, of course, healthy programs. So that's the theory of it. And of course, what that does is helps you, have a good reaction to the stimuli that you receive. And of course, from that, achieve good outcomes. And I say what we want to do is recognize that actually we can simplify all of this by focusing on a few things. And of course, the way that I do this from the point of view, of course, of hearing voices, is to say that actually there are a sort of handful of techniques that actually work quite well. So if my process representing by this is producing an unhappy experience, I will typically notice it in one of two places, most obviously. The one is my reaction to a new stimulus as it arrives. The other one is dissatisfaction with an outcome that I might actually be achieving. And once I recognize the program that's in, that that there's a situation in which this happens frequently, that's of course where it becomes a problem, that what I can learn to do is I can actually interrupt it and replace it. And usually, but not always, I'm interrupting over here at the reaction, because this is the thing that I feel. This is when I notice it the most. This is the point in the process that is producing the strongest signal, usually. And of course, that's where I interrupt it. And of course, interrupting it is simply slowing it down. And of course, this is where I bring in that information hierarchy or the story model and kind of say, how can I shape this differently to achieve a kind of outcome of choice? Of course, what happens is that we want to learn, and by doing that, the reaction, if it's a bad reaction, a poor emotional reaction, if I'm seeing it as a threat, that my quality of life is not what I wanted to achieve, what that's doing down here is it's pushing me down to our monitoring system where I'm actually monitoring the program and the outcomes. And of course, that's the piece I can actually work with, change something in the program. And of course, that brings me back up here into my drive and soothe system. So by changing something in my program, that's me acting. And of course, that will achieve better outcomes for me. That's the emotional point of view. This is the informational point of view. And of course, what happens is we know when you're hearing voices that this whole thing is exaggerated because the stimuli are extreme in the way that they're introduced to say by this unusual phenomenon. And of course, because we don't know what to expect, so the piece that's difficult from our programming point of view is it's very difficult to create good expectations from this thing. So what we have to do is we have to learn to preempt it and prevent our response to it from being an unpleasant one. And we do that simply by pulling, in theory, the theory of it is, or a visual of it, is simply to say, pull this interrupt sooner and actually disrupt it by actually changing, by completely changing how we think about it. So of course, I'm doing three things here. I am by interrupting and replacing it, I am I'm actually owning the transaction. The way that I preempt and actually prevent is, as you'll see in the mind strategies, is, rather than letting voices be who they claim to be, I've made caricatures of them, given them childish names, so that actually, not only do I use the childish name to interrupt them, but proactively, at the start of my day, I pick a theme that I'm going to use in my interrupt. I play through the day in my mind. So any important event in my mind, I simply play through it and say, what is the opportunity, as I mentioned on the previous slide? What is the risk? How am I going to make sure that I achieve the opportunity and minimize and mitigate, the risks associated with it? So I've planned for it, I've prepared for it. And in that kind of sense, I'm actually preventing, and preempting voices from interfering with my process. And in doing that, of course, I am owning my relationships. Over here, I'm owning the transaction. Over here, I'm owning the relationship with voices, because that's how they interfere, is by asserting this abusive and dominant relationship. And of course, the other piece I need to work with is, of course, the outcome that I'm achieving. So this is in my interpretation of it. So by playing through the day, I'm setting my expectations. So when those important events actually happen in my day, I'm achieving what I set out to achieve. What I achieve, my satisfaction, if you like, or my perception of what I achieve, is as good as or better than what I expected. Of course, that then stimulates my reward signal. And of course, what that does is it helps me feel in control of my story. I'm building my story. And of course, I'm owning my story and making voices irrelevant kind of in my story. But the same idea applies, whether you hear voices or not, of course, because if you just think of this as, as the unexpected stimulus, in your day, no matter what situation that you're actually in, of course, you can apply the same principles, to actually manage your happiness QA system. And of course, that was how I learned NLP, in the beginning. Anyway, I say all I've done is kind of say that actually, when you hear voices, these unusual stimuli are extreme, and because the phenomenology presents a situation in which voices are able to, create this scenario in which they're observing what we're doing from a vantage point, which they then, use to say they can actually influence, what I encounter and the outcomes I'm achieving. By following this process with them, I'm simply saying, actually, I don't care about your vantage point. You comment what I'm doing, I don't give a damn. And by actually, focusing on the outcomes that I'm achieving in the real world and stimulating my reward signals from the real world, I'm displacing voices from my life, from my story. So this is going to say is the simplicity of of NLP. Own the transaction, own the relationship with this program, if you like, or with this case with voices. And if you do those two things, you can create the kind of outcomes that you want, and you can do it deliberately and stimulate your reward signals deliberately. So this applies to everybody really, in terms of managing, as I say, your happiness QA. So, sorry, QA is quality assurance. I should have said that earlier on. That's just me coming again from applying business thinking to this, because it's a process that has lots of steps, with information that we're measuring in terms of emotion. If you really need to get into the detail of it, and some people might need to, then of course the theory we've just been through is a tool, of course, for helping people do that. But to say the simple thing is you can recognize that the programming happens whether we like it or not. You can identify points in it where you can interrupt them, insert new information to replace them. And of course, what you can do is you can actually work to preempt and prevent. So you can actually stop doing things and you can start doing new things to kind of to create new programs that of course help you benefit. And you do that based on saying, well, what's significant in my life? What kind of life do I want to create? If that's the kind of life I want to create using the My Story model, then I'm going to do more of these things and less of those things. I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to stop doing that. Very simple, as I say, life coaching kind of idea from that perspective. So that's it. Thank you for listening. Whilst I say this particular video, as I say, contains a lot of copyright stuff. Of course, this is the basics on mind strategies is in other videos, which I want to keep free for people who hear voices. So if you can help me do that, I have a fundraiser on crowdrise.com for someone hears voices. If you're a researcher in the field of the mind and would like to work together, you can reach me on greg@mad-sense.com. So thank you for listening.